I was thinking of making sure to study something today from Rabbi Sachs, who passed away on Shabbos, sadly. And so I opened up the website and I found something that he wrote on this week's parsha, on not this week's parsha, on the parsha that we're studying on Bereshit, pretty much exactly where we're up to. So maybe in a moment or two, we'll head over there and maybe I'll share the screen and we could read some of what he wrote. And like the sages say, the best memory for a righteous person is his good deeds and the Torah that he teaches. And by divine providence, the theme of what he was writing about is the concept of how we achieve immortality. So that is appropriate, I should say. So just to go back and think about what we're up to in the story, pretty much we don't learn exactly in order, but pretty much in order. We're talking about the consequences for Adam and Eve from the sin. We talk about the consequence to the serpent, and then to the woman, and then to man. And we discuss some of it, and maybe we'll go back to it in a moment. Maybe we'll go back to it later, but I want to, I guess, begin perhaps with the concept of what Rabbi Sachs is going to discuss. And first I'll offer one perspective, which I mentioned in the past, and then we'll discuss the perspective of Rabbi Sachs and how he sees it in the verses which are really beautiful. It fits like a glove. So we're talking about the concept of the first thing we see when we find out that when Adam and Eve realize that they consumed the fruit of the tree and now they have knowledge of good and evil, the first thing they realize they're naked, and therefore the first thing the verse tells you is that they sewed fig leaves and to conceal themselves. And then you have God approaching them and saying, who told you that you're naked, etc. So we'll take a minute or two to talk about garments, just because that's where Rabbi Jonathan Sachs goes. He goes with the garments. So just talk about garments for a moment. So I've said this before, so probably people know about this, but we'll say it again because it's always good to think about, that the Hebrew word for garment is beged. At least I should say one of the Hebrew words for garment is beged. And beged is a fascinating word because beged comes from the word bagad, which is to betray. Betrayal is a begida, same word. Garment and betrayal is the same word. Only Hebrew could put those two together, right? How are you gonna? They think they still have them, but the first time I was introduced to a dictionary that I think that there's a dictionary that groups words based on their roots. Even in English, I didn't know English has roots, but it turns out it takes a word in Latin or Greek and gives you all the English words that are related. So you get to some interesting connections. Certainly in Hebrew, which is a holy tongue, there's a connection between garment and begida and betrayal. So the superficial, simple connection is very simple. When did Adam and Eve receive the garments? Or really, when did they appreciate the need for garments? They do so because of the sin, because of the betrayal of the tree of knowledge. So if the garments are a product of betrayal, that's why we refer to the garment as betrayal. Okay, so that's a connection, but that's not an inherent connection. In other words, it just tells you how we got the concept of garments, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that garment itself is a betrayal. So if you go a little deeper, you see that garment, in fact, is the concept of betrayal, because what does a garment do? A garment, by definition, is concealment. And because of the world we live in, which the Zohar refers to as Alma de Shikra, the world of falsehood, as opposed to the world of truth, which is the spiritual worlds. So we live in a world of falsehood, and therefore it's very easy for us to conceal and hide through our garments. So I can be rich and I can dress as poor. I can be poor and dressed as rich. It's not a problem. You can present anything you want, and everybody knows the social experiments that they try. And they put somebody in Grand Central Station, and he says, "I lost my wallet. Could you help me? Could you help me buy a ticket?" And if he's dressed in a nice suit, he'll make thousands of dollars a day. If he's dressed in rags, he'll make nothing. Why? Because that's the way it is. We judge each other through our garments, and garments by definition are a way of concealing. They could conceal how we feel. And in fact, I could, in fact, be very sad and dress up very festive. That's the way it is. So the garments have the idea of betrayal. Kabbalistic. I don't want to. Okay, let's leave the Kabbalah aside. We'll leave it for another time. Okay, let's dabble in the Kabbalah. Why not? According to the Kabbalah, in addition to the 10 powers of the soul, we also have what they call 3 garments of the soul. In Hebrew, levushim, garments. And what are my garments? My action is a garment, my speech is a garment, and even what I choose to think about consciously is a garment. Why is that a garment? It's a garment because it's betrayal. Why is it betrayal? I could feel certain feeling and betray that in the way I act. I could feel cruel and act nicely. I could feel that I hate you and say I love you. I could hate something and think about how wonderful it is, right? Because that's not who I am. It's my garments. And garments are a betrayal. Now, there's also an advantage to a garment. The advantage to a garment is that it's very easy, relatively easy to change. So it's much harder to change my personality. So if I'm not a nice person, it would take me a long time to become nice, to transform the self, to transform the emotion. It could be done. It just takes time. It's like going to the gym. You can't change your body in overnight. You can't change your soul overnight. You could with exercise, but it's not going to happen overnight. But a garment you can change instantaneously, right? I don't like my suit, put on a new suit. I don't like the way I'm acting, act differently. I don't like the words coming out of my mouth. It's very relatively easy to change what I'm saying. And that's why, on one hand, there's a concept of garment being a betrayal, which is negative. On the other hand, there's a certain positive aspect that if we lived in a world without betrayal and you ask somebody, don't try it at home, but if your spouse asks you, how do I look today? It's a trick question. You can't say the truth. And if you don't say the truth, they know you're not saying the truth. So you better be careful. But the bottom line is that you have the ability to betray and say something you don't feel, right? If someone asks you, if someone asks you, if I had to be honest 100% of the time, there would be no civilization. So that garment is the ability to betray. And that's what garments are, the betrayal. However, every negative also has a positive, which is what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, that because of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there's a mixture of good and evil. So the way the Kabbalists say, there's no good without bad and there's no bad without good. And therefore, the concept of betrayal has a profound positive aspect to it. And what is that? Not only it allows for civilization, because I don't have to tell you that I hate you. I don't have to tell you that I don't care about you. But there's also a positive aspect. And that is that the garments have the power to positively affect somebody. So if I'm in a bad mood and I dress up with a fancy suit, I'm going to feel better. That's just reality. That's the power of the garment. Kabbalah explains why the garment has this power, but the fact is the garment has the power. If you don't trust me, go check it out. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry called the fashion industry, and people want to dress up, not only because they want to impress other people, but also for themselves. You put on a nice garment, you feel good about yourself. And therefore, the betrayal is not really a betrayal, because I'm in a bad mood. I dress up in a festive mood. I dressed up in festive garments, but then my emotion follows the garment. Now I actually become in a good mood. So in the final analysis, it's not really a betrayal because my heart will follow the garment. And the same thing is true in the spiritual world. And now the scientists are catching up, the psychologists are understanding that the road to the heart is through action. If you want to be happy, act happy. If you want to be kind, act kind. And Judaism has been saying it for thousands of years. And it's classified, it's written, and it's coined. The phrase coined about 900 years ago is the book of Sefer HaChinuch, the book of education, which seeks to offer reasons for all the mitzvot. And he comes up with a formula that works for almost every mitzvah. And that is as follows. The lev, the heart, follows the action. So if God wants you to, if you want to feel something, do it. You want to feel free, eat the matzah, act free. You want to feel kind, you want to be kind, do kind. And your heart will follow the action. So in that sense, the betrayal is not really a betrayal. The betrayal is initially a betrayal. I don't feel kind, I act kind. That's a spiritual garment. And initially, it's a betrayal. But then that betrayal leads me to a heightened sense of self and leads me to a higher level, which is why in Hebrew, there's another word for garment, and that is simla. Now, in simla, sin mem lamed hey, simla. In modern Hebrew, simla is a dress, meaning a woman's dress. But in biblical Hebrew, simla is a garment. When the Torah, for example, refers to the concept of the mitzvah of returning a lost object, it uses as an example a donkey or a simla, a garment. Now, what is the word simla? Simla is the same letters as shalem, complete. Complete. Garments make you complete. The betrayal, what used to be a betrayal, now makes you complete. And that is something fascinating because the ability to conceal, hide the nakedness, meaning hide my negative aspects and focus on good action, garments are like action, that actually will lead me to a higher level and a state of holiness. So you have both those elements in the garments. Okay, that's the Kabbalah. We could speak about this for a year, but that's the Kabbalah in a nutshell. Now I want to go on the verse to show you point out something in the verses. Then we go to Jonathan Sacks. So I'm going to share the screen if I can. I'll see if this works. So here we have the screen. Here we have the verses. So initially you have in the beginning. So I'm Genesis chapter 3, of course, and this describes verse 7 describes right after they consume of the fruit of the tree, and she eats it, and she gives it to him, and he eats it as well. That's verse 6. What happens in verse 7? And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves and made themselves girdles. Okay, now they're covered. Wonderful. Then you hear the voice of God. Maybe we'll discuss this later, but they're covered. We know they have fig leaves and they're covered. Now we'll go to the end of the story. After God rebukes them and gives them punishment, etc., etc. Verse 21. And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife shirts of skin, and he dressed them. Why does God have to make them shirts of skin? Because he doesn't like fig leaves. He'd rather wear them leather jackets. He likes leather better than leaves. What's happening here? Why does God have to give them, dress them if they are already covered? What is God telling them that they don't know already? They already figured out that they're naked, and they actually even had the creativity of creating garments. Wonderful. So what does God give them after the whole story? God gives them garments of leather, garments of skin. So what is the meaning? So Kabbalistically speaking, and you'll see Rabbi Sacks takes a different approach, but Kabbalistically speaking, what's happening here is God is telling them that there is another function of garments. Garment is not only to conceal the nakedness. Garment is not only a result of the sin, but garment can also have a positive effect. Positive effect is that it could help us focus on what we want to focus on, right? It could help us focus on the physically speaking, it could help us focus on the parts of the person we're talking to that are not going to focus on the nakedness. And spiritually speaking, the garments could actually bring us to a higher spiritual state. There's a famous statement in the Talmud that Rabbi Yochanan would refer to his garments as mechabduta, that which gives me honor, because he understood the deep psychological power of clothing on the person who wears it. And if you're in a bad mood, one of the ways to become in a good mood is to dress up. So that's what God taught them in verse 21, which they did not know in verse 7. In verse 7, they just see the negative aspect of garment. We have a problem. The garment is going to protect the problem. In other words, it's going to try to minimize and mitigate the problem. Verse 21, God is saying, take full advantage, take full advantage of the power of the garment, and both physically and spiritually. And this is, Rabbi Sacks is going to mention this, that the Hebrew word for or, shirts of skin, the Hebrew word for or is ayin vav resh. Now the ayin and the aleph, the ayin and the aleph are related, phonetically related. They sound very similar. If you're Ashkenaz, they sound exactly the same. If you're Yemenite, they sound Sephardi or Yemenite, they sound a little bit more different. but nevertheless they're different. And the Talmud explains that Rabbi Meir, when he read this verse, he made it sound, he interpreted it as God made them not skins of not shirts of skin, but shirts of light, because or let there be light represents or could be light. So when Rabbi Meir reads the story, he says God shows them that the garments could bring light, and that's really what's happening here. Is based on the spiritual interpretation that the garment, it helps us betray how we feel and come to a higher level. So that's the power of the garment. It can go both ways. It could make us more selfish, more aware of the self, and it can also elevate us to a higher level. Of course, it's true about physical garments as well. Fashion, the function of garments could either make one focus on the parts of the body that should be concealed or otherwise. So that's depending where you buy your fashion, depending on what the culture is trying to emphasize. But that's another story beyond the scope of this discussion, but also interesting. So that's the story in short about the difference, the change in the garments. That when God introduces the concept of garments in verse 21, he's referring to a different word. He's referring to a different element of the garment, not the garment as betrayal, but the garment as something that could be alma, that could lead to shleimut, that can lead to a completion, that could lead to a higher level. So that's one point.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
So is the Torah trying to point us also to the story of Joseph with the Ketonet Pasim?
Oh, so if you've come from the perspective of the Kabbalah, every time the Torah emphasizes garments, you can tie it into the spiritual concept of garments. And I'm just going to give the example of the garments of Joseph because that's what you alluded to. But there's also garments we're going to read about next week, the garments of Esav and Jacob, the whole idea of Jacob and Esav, Jacob wearing Esav's garments. So we have all, but yeah, every time you touch the word garments in the Torah, you're triggering this discussion. So let's talk about Joseph for a moment. What's the story with, okay, yeah, I'm going to go a little different just to show. Kotnot, when Joseph's father makes Joseph a linen tunic, he uses the word ketonet pasim. Ketonet is another word for garment, and that's the same word that the Torah uses in verse 21, where God makes for Adam and Eve katnot or, shirts of skin. So this word katnot is the word ketonet pasim, a lined garment. So Jacob is giving Joseph the positive aspect of garment, right? That's the word ketonet pasim. The pasim is the lined, or pasim could also mean the material it was made from, but either way, it's katnot. Katnot is, here they translate it as shirts of skin, but ketonet is the tunic. So that's the word that God uses when God makes the garments for Adam and Eve, which according to this interpretation is the positive aspect of garment. Now let's continue a little in the story, where you read the story where Joseph is sold as a slave and then he's purchased by Potiphar. Long story short, the wife of Potiphar tries to seduce him. She waits for a time when everybody is home. Everybody leaves the home. She's home alone with him. And she tells him, lie with me. He refuses. She grabs his garment and he runs outside and he leaves the garment in her hand. That is the verse. That's the story. And it seems like a little bit too much detail just to tell you the story that she accuses him of trying to force himself upon her. I mean, this is not the Hollywood film. Why do I have to have every detail that he left the garment in her hand? And from the Kabbalistic perspective, the concept of a beged, the concept of a betrayal is critical to that understanding of what's happening in that story. What's happening is she tells him when she grabs his garment, she's telling him, you should betray. In other words, you want to betray. Why don't you listen to my seduction? Because that's exactly what you want. You are the betrayal. Then what does he say? Literally, vayazov bigdo biyada. He leaves his garment in her hand. Literally, he leaves his betrayal in her hand, which means he says the desire to betray that I may or may not have, but let's assume he has it. Let's assume it was the Talmud says that it was a very big temptation and he almost succumbed the reason he didn't, he was able to think about his father, but that's another story. But there was a great temptation. So what Joseph is, if you read the verse literally, in other words, he left the garment in her hand, which could be read, he left the betrayal in her hand. He understands and explains to her that the betrayal is not me. The betrayal is a garment. I could put it on, I can take it off. It doesn't define me. So he leaves the betrayal in her hand, but he says, I can separate myself from that. So it's if you're sensitive to the way the Torah tells its stories, the garment that his father gives him has one name, ketonet. The garment indicating in the story of betrayal, and ultimately he does not betray his values. He does not betray his core. He does not betray his spiritual self, but he separates himself from the betrayal and leaves the desire for betrayal in her hand. There it uses the word beged, which means betrayal. So that's the way you read the Torah. You read the Torah, you have to understand the subtleties of the words the Torah is using, because otherwise, if you read it, then you're not careful and you're not sensitive to the nuances. You miss the whole story, and that's a very obviously a profound lesson. Profound lesson is that we are now a mixture of negativity and positivity as a result of the consumption of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And the big question is, how do we define ourselves? Are we essentially good? And the urge for negativity is a garment that we can put on and take off. In other words, that's not us. How do we self-define? Is the negativity, is that a garment or is that the core? And if you make a mistake and you think you're your garment, then you're in trouble. The Hasidim have a funny story. Now, Hasidic stories usually have very profound messages, but sometimes the plot is not elaborate. This plot is actually not bad, but it's comical. Richard's not here. The plot is like this. Once upon a time, there was a Jew, and the Jew was riding the train in Russia. All the good Hasidic stories happen in Russia because that's where the Hasidim were from. Once upon a time, true story, I ended up in Knoxville, Tennessee on a Yom Kippur, and we made a minyan for Israelis. And these Israelis were all Sephardim. They were Yemenites. And the rabbi, who was my friend's brother, is sitting after the prayer on Kol Nidre, and the Israelis were they're Sephardim, they're very strict. Their stores opened 364 days a year, 24 hours, literally, and it closes once a year, Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, they come to shul, and they chant the entire service from beginning to end by heart. How they do that, I don't know, but that's what they do. In any case, they take Yom Kippur very seriously, and they have all the songs from their youth, and it's very, very inspiring. Very inspiring Yom Kippur. In any case, after the service, the rabbi is sitting and telling stories about Hasidic stories. Now, what does the Chabad rabbi know? Okay, Levi Yitzchak Barditchev and the Baal Shem Tov, and all the stories began. It happened in Russia and in Poland and in wherever else in Romania. And the Israelis say, I don't understand. How come you don't have any stories from Yemen? They couldn't understand it. But we didn't have any stories from Yemen. But in any case, why am I saying this? So there's a story. The story happened in Russia. It didn't happen in Yemen. They were on a train. Actually, I don't know if there was a train in Yemen at the time. I don't know if there's a train in Yemen right now. I don't know. In any case, so they're on the train. And the problem is that the Jew has to wake up because he has to get to a stop. So he's in a cabin. And in the cabin, he's in a cabin, and lo and behold, the guy sits down next to him is a Russian general, and the Russian general is next to him in the cabin. Okay, he tells the conductor, the Jew tells the conductor, do me a favor, wake me up at 5 o'clock because that's when my stop is going to happen. So the Russian conductor says, no problem, I'll wake you up at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock in the morning, he wakes him up. The problem is it's pitch black. So the Jew, instead of putting on his own clothing, he puts on the clothing of the Russian general, but he didn't know, he didn't see. So he gets up at the station. He's dressed like a Russian general. He gets home, knocks on the door. His wife opens up the door, and she's shocked. She says, Yankel, what happened to you? He says, what's the matter? She says, look at yourself. He says, what's the matter? He says, you're dressed like a Russian general. He says, that foolish conductor. He woke up the general instead of waking me up. So that's the story of the idea that you can't judge, you can't define yourself by your garments. And of course, spiritually, you can't define yourself by every urge you feel, by every temptation you feel, because that actually may not be your core. And defining what your core is tricky business. One more funny story, deep story, because I'm going to say it only because today is the 21st of Cheshvan, which means yesterday was the 20th of Cheshvan, which means yesterday was the birthday of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Ber, who was born in 1806 Chaf Aleph. 1860. It wasn't 61 yet. 1860, and he is considered the Maimonides of Hasidic philosophy, because he would give very deep interpretations of the Hasidic literature, and he actually was organized it in a fascinating way. In any case, this is the story about the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Ber. He had a chassid, and this is pre-communism. So some of his chassidim were extremely wealthy, and even though Jews couldn't live in Petersburg, but if you were, it was beyond the pale of settlement. But if you were very wealthy, you got the pass, and you could live in St. Petersburg. And this fellow, this chassid, was a Jew who lived in St. Petersburg for his business. And he had, in St. Petersburg, he didn't dress with his Hasidic garb, because it's not appropriate in Petersburg. If you want to fit in, you have to dress like in Western garments, and that's what he did. But when he came to the Rebbe, when he came to Lubavitch, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, he would put on the Hasidic garment. And this is going on for years, maybe decades. In Petersburg, he dresses one way, and he comes to the Rebbe, he dresses like the Hasidic garb. And you probably heard the story, because I said it before, and probably Rabbi Darren said it before. But in any case, one day happens, he says, enough. I'm living in a lie for decades. I have to be honest. I cannot be a hypocrite. And therefore, I'm going to be honest myself. And therefore, the next time he came to Lubavitch, which is the little town that the Rebbe lived in, he says, I'm dressing the way I usually dress. And he comes with his Western garments. And everybody's shocked. This big chassid, great philosopher in the Hasidic philosophy. And all of a sudden, he shows up like a Western dressed man. It was the talk of town. So finally, he gets into the fifth Rebbe, and fifth Rebbe says, look, listen, my friend. He says, everybody knew you were fooling us. Everyone knew you were putting up a show. We all knew. We think it's a secret that you dress one way in Petersburg and another way in Chabad, another way in Lubavitch. We knew this. The only thing is, we thought that here, when you dress in your Hasidic garb, that's your real person. And when you're in Petersburg, you're fooling them. Now we find out that you are who you are in your Petersburg, and you in St. Petersburg. And when you come here, you're fooling us, right? So we're always fooling somebody. The question is, who are we fooling? Who is our true identity? When we feel spiritual, is our true identity, and then when we have a negative urge, are we fooling the rest of the world, or vice versa? So that's the question. Who are you, and what is the show? And that's a deep question. What is the garment and what is the core? Not always an easy question to answer. But in any case, from the perspective of the Torah, it's clear the core is the positivity and the negativity is the garment. But on the other hand, when you sense the negativity, you can use the garment, the power of the garment, the power of betrayal, to do act of kindness, even if I don't feel it. And the betrayal leads to completeness, because acting kind makes you kind, etc., etc. So that's just the idea of mentioning this funny story, and then the story of the fifth Chabad Rebbe, because it's the day after his birthday.
Rabbi, I actually had I'm sorry. The question I wanted to ask about the Ketanat Posim was actually, I like the story about Potiphar's wife, but I was more talking about Jacob makes a Ketanat Poset for his son Joseph, but he doesn't make it for his other sons.
Yeah, so a garment in the positive aspect could be aspirational. In other words, you talk about, for example, the garment in the Torah and the Bible, you talk about the garments of the high priest. The garments of the high priest has to wear fancy garments, gold, silver, copper, gold, silver, all different colors. It has to be beautiful garments, the kavod u'tiferet, for glory and for beauty. And the question is, why does God care? And by the way, if the high priest or any priest goes into the temple and offers a garment and offers an offering, missing one of the garments, just one, the service is invalid and he's liable of death. In other words, from the heavenly court. And the question is God so superficial that the person working in the temple of the high priest has to have beautiful garments? And if he's not wearing a $5,000 Armani suit, then the service is not appropriate. What's happening here? So the answer is, when you put on a fancy garment, it puts you in the mood. In other words, when you put on beautiful garments, it means I have an aspiration that I have to reach this level. You see what I'm saying? So in the spiritual sense, if you give me a fancy garment, I have to live up to that garment. And when Joseph gives when Jacob gives Joseph a unique garment for his son, what he's telling him is not, I'm just pointing out that you're better than everybody else. It's not what he's doing. He's saying, I expect your actions, your behavior, your position. There's more expectation of you, and I need you to live up to the person who's dressed this way. And in that sense, the additional level of honor that the garment bestows is really an additional level of expectation. And again, the garment brings about expectation. That's what happens with the high priest. It's the same concept. I'm not on that level. Doesn't matter. Act if you're on that level, but I'm not. I don't want to betray who I really am. No, that's the positive aspect of betrayal. If you betray who you really are, you know what happens? You become better. You become stronger.
Rabbi, there seems to be a connection between that original question when they're walking in the garden and God says, "Oh, where are you?" He was asking where they are in their heads, in their lives, in their core, and this whole idea of a cover seems to be related to identity.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So let's just jump back at the verse for a moment. Get to the verse you're referring to. We're referring to verse 8 or 9, wherever it is. Verse 8. Verse 8 and 9. So, and they heard the voice of the Lord God going in the garden to the direction of the sun, and the man and his wife hid from before the Lord God in the midst of the trees of the garden. Verse 9. And the Lord God called to man, and he said to him, Ayeka, where are you? Now, why does God have to ask man, where are you? So Rashi says, God doesn't want to startle man. Let's read the Rashi. We have the trick. We have the magic button. We can show the Rashis. Verse 9, modern technology. And the Lord God said to man, called to man and said to him, where are you? Where are you? Says Rashi. He knew where he was. God knows where Adam is. But he asked him this in order to enter into conversation with him, lest he be frightened to answer if he should punish him suddenly. That's Tanchuma. That's the Medrash. And the Medrash brings other examples. So with Cain, he said to him, where is your brother Abel? Right? God says, where's your brother? And then if everyone knows the second half of the verse, am I my brother's keeper? But the first half of the verse is God says, where is your brother Abel? Same question. Where is your brother? God doesn't know where he is. God knows, but this is just a way of starting a conversation. And so with Balaam, who are these men with you? Right? When Balaam is the Gentile prophet who Balak, the king of Moab, tries to hire to curse the Jews, and instead he comes and blesses the Jews. But in any case, God comes to Balaam at night and says, who are these men? Now, God doesn't know who the men are. God knows, but that's to start a conversation, not to startle them. For the purpose of entering a conversation with them, and so with Chizkiah in regard to the emissaries of Merodach Baldan in the story of Isaiah. Okay, what happens here? So that's the simple story. Ayeka, where are you? So now the commentaries point out, Ayeka, where are you, is not the common word of saying, where are you? Where are you? How do you say, where are you? How do you say where in Hebrew? Where?
Ephel.
Ephel. Ephel is where. And in fact, you have it in the Torah. Where else? Where is it in the Torah? Trivia question. It's in where Joseph, when Jacob, I'm sure it's in other places, but one place is where Jacob dispatches Joseph to see how his brothers are doing. Jacob dispatches Joseph to see how the 10 brothers are doing, and that's when Joseph goes, and that's when he's sold as a slave. They abduct him and sell him as a slave. So before he reaches them, it says he meets a man, and he asks the man, he says, what are you looking for? He says, I'm looking for my brothers. Hagida Nali, please tell me, Eifo Heim Ro'im, where are they pasturing? Eifo is where. That's typically what Eifo means. What is Ayeka? Ayeka is a different, unique word for where. So I already forgot who says this, but the commentaries point out that Ayeka means there's two ways of saying where are you. One way is you're on vacation. You're away from your natural spot. So I want to know where you are. Another way of saying where are you is the opposite. Where are you in relation to where you belong? Right? If you go away, I said, where did you go on vacation? That's one question. You don't belong on vacation. You belong in your house. You went on vacation. So I want to know where you are. So that's more of a technical thing, a geographical thing. Where are you? But Ayeka is, where are you in relation to where you belong? And that's what Jill's point is. Ayeka is not just geographical, where exactly in the garden are you hiding, but Ayeka is, where are you in relation to your spiritual state? You had a spiritual fall. And that is that's what's happening. Part of this discussion is, how do you define self now? Who are you? What is your essence? What is your core? And to protect against that question, man puts up garments. And of course, garments don't answer the question of who you are, because garments are external. They don't answer the question of who I am. So God is, so God says, so Adam says, and he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I am naked, so I hid. Okay, so hiding doesn't help. Hiding doesn't help you from the question of, where am I in relation to myself? I cannot say the story because it's a Hasidic story on this verse. I cannot say it. Tried not to say it, but it's not working, so I'll have to say it. The story is like this. The story is that the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, was arrested in Russia and charged with, I guess, going against the government, because there was, without going into the history now, the big holiday for Chabad is the 19th of Kislev, which is just under a little less than a month. And that's the day he was released from prison. When he was in prison, so there were different various learned Gentiles who would minister, government officials who would come to question him. And while they would question him, they would also speak about Jewish philosophy in general. And what's fascinating is that after the fall of communism, the communists retained these files, and we have the protocols of the interrogations of Rabbi Shneur Zalman by the Russian government. It is absolutely fascinating, because the big claim was that the Hasidim are a cult and they're a new religion, and they're here to overthrow the Tsar. And Russia, they didn't like revolutions, they don't like new religions, so that was problematic. So he had to explain the foundations of the Hasidic philosophy to Gentiles. They were Gentile scholars, but they were Gentiles. So it's fascinating. These protocols exist. They're printed. It's unbelievable. In any case, the Hasidic story, I don't know if it's in the protocols, but the Hasidic story is that once upon a time, somebody comes into Rabbi Shneur Zalman when he was in prison, one of these government ministers, and he says, I have a question. And he says, what is the meaning of when God tells Adam, Ayeka, where are you? What does it mean? God doesn't know where he is. So what does Rabbi Shneur Zalman answer? He says what Rashi says. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, God knows where he is, but he's saying, Ayeka, where are you? Because he wants to start a conversation with him. So the minister says, no. I know what Rashi says. I want to know what the Rebbe says. He wasn't just a kid off the block. He was a scholar. He was learned. So he knew the Rashi. So he's saying, you're not going to pacify me with a Rashi. I know the Rashi. I want to know what you say. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman said like this. He says, God asks Adam, Ayeka, where are you? And then he said, God, let's say there's a person at a certain age, and the Hasidim say he named the age of this person. And the person has to ask himself, where am I? Am I fulfilling the purpose of my creation? That was the story. And the conclusion is this person was very moved, not only because he knew his age, but because he reinterpreted the story as Ayeka, where are you? Is God's call to every individual. Where are you in relation to where you need to be? Where are you in relation to fulfilling your purpose of creation? So that's the Hasidic story of Ayeka. Lines up exactly with what Vicky, with what Jill was saying. And again, everybody puts up garments to block that question. Who am I? What do you mean, who am I? I have a Lamborghini. That's who I am, right? I have a midlife crisis, so I get a second Lamborghini. People have a question of who am I? Am I fulfilling my purpose? So what are we doing? We're doing what Adam did. Adam says, you ask me who I am. Here's a garment. I'm hiding. Here's my garment. Look at my garment. Look at my passport. Look at my bank account. Look at my stock portfolio. These are all nice, but this is not who you are. This is not who you are. It's not your core. It's the garment. It's external. It's nice. It's wonderful, but it's not the answer to the question, to the everlasting question, daily question of Ayeka, am I fulfilling my purpose on creation? And if it moved that Russian minister, it's supposed to move me as well. Hopefully it will.
Rabbi,
Yes.
no, I have a question. and it's more of a linguistic one. How do we, does the word actually indicate the skin of another animal, or is it
No.
more of a metaphor of God is saying, I'm going to give you the ability to present yourself to the world in ways that are separate from your internal? What,
Yeah.
like, how do we know it's an animal skin?
It doesn't say animal skin. It says or skin. We assume it's not human skin. I told you that the Medrash says it doesn't have to be skin. It could be or even though the simple meaning is skin. Let's be clear. The simple meaning is skin, but or could be or with an aleph is light, and that is make garments of light. And that is the idea that the problem with the fig leaf is that all it did is it covered the shameful parts of the body, or the parts that not shameful, the parts that the human being is ashamed of. But that doesn't bring light, right? If you see me covering my nakedness and that's all I'm doing, that doesn't bring light, that doesn't bring dignity. So God teaches the Adam how to reimagine garments. Garments is not only covering shame, but garments could be something that could bring you dignity. And that could be both in the physical sense, and that's why it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but also in the spiritual sense, as we discussed. The power to betray how you feel can also be dignified, can also bring you to growth. Because I feel rotten this morning, but if I smile at you and I say good morning, I say, how are you? Let's go on a jog. That's all external. It's my garments. It's not how I feel. But that power to betray how I feel and act in a different way is actually going to bring me to a higher level. It's going to bring more light in my life. So the deep power of garments, both physically and spiritually, which the physical power is only an expression of the spiritual power. That's what God teaches Adam and Eve in verse 21.
And
Question, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Question,
Sorry.
Rabbi.
Yes, go ahead.
So if the verse teaches us that they were covered with fig leaves, is it fair to assume that perhaps the fruit they were eating were figs as opposed to what's normally depicted artistically as an apple? And if so, the fact that the fig does not have much of a peel, what would be the significance of that?
The first half of the question, I know there are multiple opinions what the fruit was. Talmud brings three, maybe even more. There's three interpretations in one area, in one place, either Talmud or Medrash. I'm confusing. Another place brings 7 different opinions. None of them are an apple, but Rashi brings the one that you just said. Rashi says if the Torah says fig leaf, then it's probably because the fruit was a fig, and in fact, Rashi says it in a more poetic way. Rashi says that the other trees sort of blocked Adam and Eve from taking their leaves, because the other trees said, we don't want to help sort of this cover up. But only the fig leaf, because the fig was part of the crime, therefore they go to the fig leaf. So what does the fig represent? There are different interpretations. I don't remember offhand, but the fig certainly has significance. But you're right, Rashi says it's a fig leaf. Why is it an apple? The same reason why Jews have horns, because that's the way it was depicted in the Middle Ages by the artists. So that's why if Jews have horns, then the fruit of the tree was an apple. That's the extent of what I know on the subject. Okay, let's look at a verse or two, and that will set us up for Rabbi Sachs, and then we'll read him inside because we want to say it in his words, because he will say it better than I, that's for sure. So we're going back. Oops. Let's go back to share the screen. Let's look at the verses for a minute. Let us close the Rashis. Okay, so these are terrible verses at the end. We didn't get to it today. That how God tells Adam and Eve and the serpent how terrible it is, and the punishments that will come, and everything that happens. Now, what if you were Adam and Eve? If you were Adam and you're a person that you just actually blamed your wife. God said, what happened? God says, why did you eat of the fruit of the tree? And what did you say? The woman who you gave to me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate it. So he's a person not really taking responsibility. He's blaming his wife. It probably was the first time, probably not the last time. what happens what's the first thing Adam does after he is cursed? After he gets
Right.
punished.
Rabbi, isn't he really blaming God? I mean, you gave her to me.
Yes, Rashi says that he's kafar b'toiva. He was what's the word? He was ungrateful. So he's blaming God, but he's saying the woman who you gave me, she was the one who gave me the fruit and I ate it. So he is blaming God. He's saying you gave me, but he's saying the woman, he's putting the blame in her lap. There's no question about that. The woman is the problem. God is responsible for the problem. Okay? God is responsible for the woman. Okay. So now it's very surprising. What's the first thing Adam says after that? First thing Adam says, verse 20, right? So verse 19, with the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for you were taken therefrom, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. What's the next thing he does? He probably goes home to his wife and says, look how terrible you are. Look, you're responsible for all the death in the world. That's what I would do. Right? Blame her for the death. What does he call her? What does he do? He names her. What does he name her? And the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all life. Now, we're used to this verse, but this verse is radical because if the verse would say, and man called his name, the name of Eve, death, because she was responsible for all the death in the world, you would say that makes sense, right? She gave him the fruit. She caused death. Call her death. That should be her name. Eve's name should be death. But no, her name is Chava. Chava is Chaya. She's the source of life. What happens here? Adam now is the first time he's recognizing, he's correcting the mistake of before, where before he blames her for the sin. And now he's giving her, this is the beginning of the correction. And he names her Chava. She's the mother of all living. Okay. But there is a lot of significance in this verse, at least according to Rabbi Sachs, and it's very profound. And therefore, we're going to go straight into what he says, and we'll see what we can make of this. Can I make this bigger? I don't know. Can I make this bigger? I'm sure I could. I just don't know how.
Control plus.
There we go. Then I get all this stuff. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Okay, so what he's saying here, and first I'll say it by heart. I'll say it in a second, and then go into his words. What does the verse say immediately before? Immediately before the verse says, "For dust you are, and to dust you will return." So in other words, God sort of signifies that you're going to die. Okay, that's the knowledge. And then immediately after he names her, what happens right there? So we'll read. We'll read. Suddenly Adam knew. Oh, whoops! I wasn't going to. When he heard the words, "Dust you are, and to dust you will return," for the first time. I'm sorry. When he heard the words, "Dust you are, and dust you will return," for the first time, Adam became conscious of his mortality. There is no more profound self-knowledge than this, that the world will one day be without us, and we without the world. Much of civilization has turned on this single fact, that our lives are finite, a microsecond in the context of eternity. And however long we live, our time is limited and all too short. The Torah is silent on what Adam's thoughts were in the wake of this discovery, but we can reconstruct them. Until then, death has not entered his consciousness, but now it did. What if we are mortal, will live on? Is there a part of us that will continue, even though we ourselves are no longer here? It was then that Adam remembered God's words to the woman. She would give birth to children, in pain to be sure, but she would bring new life into the world. Suddenly, Adam knew that though we die, if we are privileged to have children, something of us will live on. Our genes, our influence, our examples, our ideals. That is our immortality. This was an idea that eventually shaped the character of the whole of Judaism in contradistinction to most other cultures in ancient and modern times. The Tower of Babel and the great buildings of Ramses II, the two most significant glimpses the Torah gives us of the empires of the ancient world, testify to the idea that we defeat mortality by building monuments that outlast the winds and sands of time. Judaism has quite a different idea. that we defeat mortality by engraving our ideals in the hearts of our children and they on theirs, and so on to the end of time. When the Mesopotamians and Egyptians thought of buildings, Abraham and his descendants thought of builders. And this is a quote that we say from the Mishnah, we say it every day, call them not your children, but your builders. In Hebrew, banayich could be your children, and bonayich is your builders. So we quote the verse, and we say it every day, that v'rav shlom banayich, much peace to your children. So the Talmud says, don't read children, read builders. Why? So Rabbi Sachs is saying, your children are your builders. What the ancient world tried to do is achieve immortality through buildings. We achieve it through passing on morals to the next generation. Judaism became the most child-centered of faith, the most child-centered of faiths. But there is one significant difference between personal immortality and the immortality we gain by those we bring to life and who will live on after us. The latter cannot be achieved alone. Until he became aware of his mortality, Adam could think of his wife as a mere ezer kenegdo, usually translated as a suitable helper. He thought of her as his assistant, not his equal. She shall be called woman, Isha, for she was taken from a man, Ish. She was in his eyes an extension of himself. This we said many times. In the beginning, he sees wife as Ishat, which means taken from man, as an extension from self. Now he knew otherwise. Without her, he could not have children, and children were his share in eternity. He could no longer think of her as an assistant. She was a person in her own right, more even than he was, for she, not he, would actually give birth. In this respect, she was more like God than he could be. For God is he who brings new life into being. And it goes on and on and on. So if you want to share it, if you want to see it, Covenant and Conversation, 5768, Bereshit, Garments of Light, beautiful essay. But it's just nice to see it in the verses. The moment that I think it's fascinating. His observation is beautiful. Verse 19, he is told, for dust you want and dust you will return. And his first response is, turns to the wife, turns to Eve, no longer calls her Isha, the woman, which means Me'ish. Isha is from man, an extension of man. He says, no, you're the mother of all living beings. I need you for immortality. In some sense, you are greater than me. You are more like God than I. And that's a beautiful concept. And then he says, Rabbi Sachs will continue, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife shirts of skin, meaning shirts of life. The ability to see the divinity in somebody else is the light, and that's the big message of Judaism. But for that, you have to continue reading the essay. Covenant and Conversation, 5768, Bereshit is the address. So I think this is the story in short for today. I'm glad we were able to read directly from Rabbi Sachs. May it be for the elevation of his neshama. And of course, he certainly will achieve immortality by impressing the values of Torah, not just on his children, but as we say in the Shema every day, Vishinantam levanecha, teach it to your children. And the Talmud says, and Rashi quotes it, your children are your students. In other words, when we pass the Torah to somebody else, they are in fact our spiritual child. So may it be for the elevation of his soul. And he should continue inspiring people on this earth and make the earth a better place. So that's the story in short. If anybody has any comments or questions or anything else, or comments or jokes or whatever you like to say this wonderful morning, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and we'll see each other, God willing, in good health. Continuing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yasha Kov.
Shavua Tov, everyone.